Some people move to the countryside for the fresh air, others for the peace. Me? I came for freedom. Freedom from noise, freedom from rules, freedom from people like her. But peace is a funny thing. Just when you think you've found it, someone always tries to take it away. I wasn't part of their HOA. I never signed their papers. My land was mine, untouched, unbothered. Until the day she showed up. A smile too polished, a voice too sweet, and eyes that screamed control. What began as petty visits turned into letters, then threats, and eventually, fire. But what she didn't know, I wasn't just some quiet neighbor. I was the wrong person to push. And when you push the wrong person far enough, they push back harder. I bought the house at the edge of Ashwood Valley for one reason: peace. After 30 years on the bench as a federal judge, 3 decades of hardened criminals, courtroom theatrics, and legal chess matches, I was done. All I wanted now was space, silence, a place where no one told me what to do or how to live. I wasn't running from anything. I was simply returning to who I was before the robe: Benjamin Rowe, son of a rancher, reader of Tolstoy, and occasional cultivator of tomatoes. The house sat on 3 acres of hilly land, technically outside the Oakspire Ridge HOA. That was important to me. I had no interest in petty neighborhood councils, paint color ordinances, or self-important community presidents. My parcel was exempt, grandfathered in before the HOA was even formed, and I liked it that way. My first few months were uneventful. Mornings began with black coffee and birdsong. Evenings ended with a slow walk around the property, just me and the coyotes in the distance. I repaired fences, restained the porch, planted wildflowers. There was a rhythm, simple and satisfying. That rhythm broke the day Delilah Kerr showed up. It was a Tuesday, maybe late morning. I'd just come in from the garden, dirt still under my nails, when the knock came. Firm. Not urgent, but firm. I opened the door to find a woman in her mid-50s standing on my porch, dressed in a navy blazer, heels that didn't belong on gravel, and a smile so tight it could crack glass. "Judge Rowe," she said with practiced warmth. "I'm Delilah Kerr, president of the Oakspire Ridge HOA. I wanted to personally welcome you to the neighborhood." I studied her carefully. Her posture screamed power. Not the kind earned through wisdom, but the kind grasped through rules, hierarchy, and signatures on forms. I nodded once. "Appreciate that," I said. "But I believe we're not technically in the same neighborhood." Her smile didn't falter. "Technically, sure. But we consider all the surrounding homes part of our greater community." "That may be," I replied. "But my deed says otherwise. I'm not under HOA jurisdiction." She tilted her head slightly, like a teacher correcting a slow student. "That's true, for now. But the lines around Oakspire Ridge are being redrawn. The board's working closely with the city on updates." I didn't say anything. She glanced around my porch, taking mental inventory. The cedar wood was untreated. A wind chime danced in the breeze. I had a compost bin by the garage and a patch of sunflowers that didn't match her aesthetic. She didn't like what she saw. "I'm sure you understand," she continued. "We have guidelines to maintain property values, harmony, order, and appearance. We've had some concerns." "From whom?" "Community members, about the fencing, the landscaping, and recently the color of your shed." "My shed's dark green. Not on the approved palette." I let out a low laugh, the kind that didn't carry humor. "Ms. Kerr, I've spent a lifetime interpreting law, and I assure you, HOA guidelines don't apply where they legally don't exist." Something shifted in her eyes. The warmth vanished. Her smile turned brittle. "Sometimes," she said, "laws are just one piece of the puzzle. Harmony is another." She handed me a glossy brochure. Think about joining. It would make things easier. I took the pamphlet, more to end the conversation than anything else. I'll think about it. But I didn't. I tossed it in the trash after she left. That was the first knock, the first nudge, the first test. I didn't know it then. But Delilah Kerr wasn't the kind of woman who accepted no. She wasn't content with being queen of her castle. She wanted the land around it, too. And the man standing in her way? She was already planning how to break him down. I went back to my garden, but something in me had already shifted. The wind no longer sounded quite as peaceful. The horizon didn't feel so distant. And for the first time since I moved to Ashwood Valley, I locked my front gate, just in case. It started subtly, as these things often do. A letter in my mailbox. Not the usual junk or utility bills, but an envelope marked Oakspire Ridge, HOA. Important notice. I almost laughed when I opened it. Inside was a neatly typed letter informing me that my property had been noted for repeated violations of community standards. The infractions? Non-regulation paint color on outbuildings, improper fencing height, and refusal to cooperate with community engagement protocols. It was absurd. My home wasn't even under their jurisdiction. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. I called the number listed. A young woman answered in a chipper voice. When I explained the mistake, her tone changed. "Oh, Mr. Rowe, yes. We've been advised that your property is currently undergoing review for annexation. So technically, I cut in, you have no authority over my land." She hesitated, then said, "Perhaps it's best if you speak with our president." I hung up. The next day, my trash wasn't collected. The day after that, someone spray-painted a red X on the side of my shed. I had it power washed, but it didn't come off completely. A warning, maybe. Or a message. Neighbors I'd waved to weeks ago now crossed the street when I approached. Conversations stopped when I stepped outside. I wasn't just being isolated. I was being targeted. And Delilah? She didn't show up in person again. Not yet. But her presence was everywhere. Flyers left on my porch. HOA reminders pinned to my fence. Pamphlets with smiling residents and perfectly trimmed lawns slid under my door with notes like, "It's never too late to do the right thing." I spent evenings pacing my property, flashlight in hand. I installed cameras. I filed a complaint with the city, requesting confirmation, on paper, that no annexation was in process. I had to dig deep, calling a contact I knew in zoning. He promised to check the records and get back to me. Meanwhile, the pressure kept mounting. One morning, I found a notice stapled to a tree at the edge of my property. Unsightly structures in violation. Deadline to remove, 14 days. It was unsigned, but I knew where it came from. The language was classic HOA. I documented everything, photographed each letter, recorded every phone call. I was no stranger to harassment cases, but it was different when it was your home, when it was you who couldn't sleep, who kept one eye on the road outside your gate. That week, the local paper ran a small feature on neighborhood beautification initiatives. A quote from Delilah stood out. "We're working hard to ensure every part of Oakspire reflects the values we uphold, even those who haven't yet formally joined." Haven't yet. It was subtle, threatening, intentional. The implication was clear. I had a choice: join, comply, or be harassed until I broke. But they didn't know me. I didn't break, I build, and I was just getting started. It happened at night. I was in the middle of drafting an email to the zoning office, still waiting on confirmation about the so-called annexation, when the security alert popped up on my phone. Motion detected, south camera. My stomach dropped. I tapped the notification, and the live feed came up. Grainy, but clear enough to see two silhouettes moving near the tree line. At first, I thought it was teenagers cutting through the property. But then, one of them pulled something from their bag and knelt by the fence. The other stood watch. I grabbed my flashlight and my jacket and bolted out the back door. By the time I got there, they were gone. But the damage wasn't. Someone had sliced the fencing, clean, deliberate cuts in the wire. A 4-foot section had been rolled back like a gate. On the ground, I found a half-empty bottle of weed killer and a discarded gardening glove. One of my vegetable beds nearby had been doused. Tomatoes shriveled and blackening in the soil. They'd poisoned my crops. I stood there for a long time, flashlight in one hand, the glove in the other. I was furious. But more than that, I was done playing defense. The next morning, I drove straight to the sheriff's department. I brought the video footage, the glove, and a copy of every letter I'd received from the HOA. I explained the harassment. I gave names. Delilah Thornfield's at the top of the list. The deputy on duty took notes, but I could tell he was skeptical. "You have a history with this woman?" "She has a history with me," I replied. He promised to look into it, which wasn't the confidence boost I needed, but I wasn't relying on them. That same day, I reached out to a friend, Lisa Camden, an investigative journalist I had worked with before. When she saw the footage and heard the story, she didn't hesitate. "This could make a hell of a piece," she said. "HOA corruption, neighborhood abuse of power, targeting a homeowner, it's everything people hate." She was right, but I didn't just want to shame them. I wanted to expose them, and I knew just how to do it. Later that evening, I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. No return address, no stamp, hand-delivered. Inside was a single photo. It showed Delilah standing next to one of the men I'd seen in the security footage. They were talking near the HOA building, laughing. On the back, in shaky handwriting, "She's not just behind it, she's financing it." That changed everything. Now it wasn't just about property lines or rules. It was about deliberate sabotage, coordinated efforts, criminal behavior, and I knew exactly how to hit her where it hurt. That night, I launched a website, oakspireuncovered.com, and started uploading everything: photos, documents, security footage, letters, even testimonies from the few neighbors who dared to talk. Lisa helped me word the posts like a story, with sources and timestamps. It wasn't just a rant, it was an open case, and it caught fire. By the next morning, the site had over 10,000 views. By evening, it was trending in regional news. And the headline that changed everything: "Judge's home targeted after refusing HOA control. Is this neighborhood rule or organized harassment?" The firestorm had begun, and Delilah Thornfield had no idea what was coming next. By the time the third news segment aired that week, Delilah Thornfield had stopped showing her face in public. She canceled the HOA's monthly meeting. Her two closest allies on the board, Phil Garner and Betty Ruiz, resigned quietly via email, both citing health concerns no one believed. Rumors swirled through Oakspire faster than wildfire. Some said Delilah was being investigated for misuse of HOA funds. Others claimed she was already lawyering up. But me? I was just getting started. Lisa's second article dropped like a bombshell. She dug through county records and discovered something shocking. Several of the HOA's past improvement projects were funded by private checks, written from accounts tied to Thornfield Development, a shell company owned by Delilah's cousin. Translation: Delilah had been using HOA dues to fund private construction deals on land the HOA didn't even own, and in several cases on my land. I brought that evidence to the county zoning board. They were livid. "She misrepresented property boundaries and spent public funds without authorization?" the director asked, scanning the documents. "If this checks out, we'll have grounds to void every zoning approval signed by the HOA in the last year." The system was beginning to tilt in my favor, but I wasn't relying on the slow grind of bureaucracy. I had one more card to play. With Lisa's help, I organized a town hall meeting, open to all Oakspire residents. I booked the local library's auditorium and advertised it as a community forum on HOA abuse and property rights. I expected a few dozen to show up, More than 200 came. Some were angry, some were confused, but most were just tired. Tired of the petty citations, the silent surveillance, the arbitrary rules. I stepped up to the microphone. The projector screen behind me loaded with slides, fence photos, satellite images, security cam stills, HOA documents with forged timestamps, and finally, photos of my burned home, reduced to black skeletons in the night. There was silence as I laid it all out. No embellishment, just facts. This, I said, gesturing to the screen, is what happens when power goes unchecked. This is what happens when a private association believes it is above the law. Gasps echoed around the room. Then, I played the final video. Grainy security footage of a man, later identified as an HOA maintenance worker, sneaking around my property with what looked like a gas can. Time-stamped, dated, correlated with the fire investigation timeline. That was the breaking point. People began shouting, questions, demands, accusations. Some called for Delilah's arrest. Others demanded full refunds of HOA dues. But most powerful of all were the quiet voices, older residents who'd been afraid to speak until now. One woman stood up, hands shaking, and said, "She threatened to fine me for planting tomatoes in my front yard, said it didn't fit the visual standard. My husband had just died. The garden was for him." Another added, "They said I couldn't park my son's wheelchair-accessible van in my own driveway. Said it violated symmetry. I felt like a prisoner in my own home." By the end of the night, I wasn't just a homeowner fighting back. I was leading a movement. The next morning, Delilah's house was vandalized. Not by me, but by someone who'd finally had enough. Thief was spray-painted across her garage in thick red paint. Her car tires slashed. It made the news, and while I didn't condone it, I understood the fury. She filed a police report and disappeared again. But the damage was done. Public sentiment had turned. Politicians noticed. Local news anchors were calling my phone asking for exclusive interviews. And that's when the state fire marshal contacted me. "We've reopened the arson case," he said flatly. "New testimonies come in. We're looking at charges within the week." I sat in my truck outside the old, charred remains of my house, staring at the fire-scorched earth. Delilah had wanted me gone. Instead, she lit the match that would burn her entire empire down. And the best part? I hadn't broken a single law. I just told the truth, and let the truth do what it always does. Expose everything. 3 days after the community forum, the subpoenas went out. Delilah Thornfield, former HOA president and self-proclaimed guardian of community standards, was served at 7:15 a.m. by 2 sheriff's deputies. Her mugshot hit the local news before lunchtime. She was charged with fraudulent use of HOA funds, tampering with property lines, filing false zoning applications, and conspiracy to commit arson. She made bail by the afternoon, but her face was plastered across every television in town. Her pearl-white smile replaced with an expression that hovered somewhere between disbelief and full-on panic. The community she once ruled, it turned on her. Oakspire's residents weren't just angry, they were betrayed. Many had supported her blindly, signed checks without asking questions, assumed the HOA's word was law. But now, they saw the truth. She had weaponized their trust, manipulated their silence, and tried to destroy the one person who dared say no. And the fallout was brutal. First, the financials. An emergency audit revealed $146,000 in undocumented HOA spending. Dinners, personal spa treatments, a resort weekend in Aspen, all billed under the guise of landscape beautification. Then the zoning board issued a cease and desist on all active HOA projects, freezing funds, and suspending Delilah's annexation filings indefinitely. County records were being scrubbed for falsified signatures and altered plats, half of which bore her initials. And the public? They wanted blood. Residents organized a petition, this time a real one, to dissolve the HOA entirely. In less than 48 hours, they gathered over 80% of signatures from homeowners. Delilah's empire crumbled, but not without one final gasp. 2 nights before the city council was set to vote on the HOA's dissolution, I received a package on my front porch. No return address. Inside was a thick folder labeled "Confidential, Do Not Distribute." It contained legal documents, fake ones, an altered deed, forged permits, a fake signature from me, dated 3 months prior, granting limited community access to my land. It was an attempted frame job. Someone, likely Delilah or one of her die-hard allies, was trying to plant fake evidence, hoping to save whatever power she had left. But it was sloppy. The signature didn't match mine. The dates were inconsistent. And most importantly, I had security footage of the delivery. That was the final nail. I turned it over to the sheriff's office the next morning. That same day, the fire investigation concluded. Forensic evidence confirmed that the accelerant used in the arson matched chemical traces found on equipment in the HOA's storage shed. Then came the biggest twist. One of Delilah's former assistants flipped. He confessed that she had personally ordered the cleanup job, that she'd used HOA staff to harass, sabotage, and ultimately destroy my property in hopes of pushing me out or intimidating me into compliance. He named names. He gave times, places, conversations. He had saved emails. Delilah Thornfield wasn't just a corrupt HOA president. She was now facing federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. But even with the justice rolling in, I wasn't celebrating. I had to walk through what was left of my home every day. Burnt beams, charred earth. The garden I'd once tended by hand, now replaced by silence and soot. You don't just win against someone like Delilah, you endure them. I sat on a folding chair in what used to be my living room, the sky visible through the caved-in roof. My dog, Max, laid at my feet. We were alive, yes, but we were also changed. Lisa came by that evening. "They're calling you the landowner who took down the HOA," she said, smiling. I shook my head. I didn't want fame, I just wanted peace. "And now you've earned it," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Delilah's done. The HOA will be gone after the vote. And maybe now, people will finally start planting tomatoes in their front yards again." I laughed, for the first time in weeks. Maybe she was right. But there was still one act left. The final reckoning, the closure, the quiet after the storm. The morning of the city council vote was colder than usual. Maybe it was the weight of everything, the scorched memories of my home, the weight of weeks spent chasing justice, or maybe just the calm before the final thunderclap. Either way, I woke up early, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and drove into town with nothing but truth on my side. Inside the packed town hall, the energy was electric. Residents from every corner of Oakspire were seated, whispering, fidgeting. Journalists filled the back row. City officials stood behind a long, polished table, facing the crowd. In the center of it all sat Delilah Thornfield. Her designer blazer couldn't mask the unraveling. Her eyes were sunken, lips tight. She looked smaller than usual, not physically, but in presence. Her mask of superiority had cracked. When they called her name, she stood, cleared her throat, and launched into a monologue that tried, desperately, to rewrite history. "I acted only in the best interest of this community," she said, voice trembling. "My intentions were to preserve order, protect value, and maintain standards." The silence that followed was damning. Then the mayor gestured to me. "Would the complainant like to speak?" I stood up. The hush in the room deepened. "I moved here for peace," I began, steady. "For open skies, for soil under my nails. I didn't ask to be part of the HOA. My property was never within its boundaries. And yet, they tried to claim it, control it, destroy it." I paused, looked around. The eyes staring back weren't just sympathetic. They were angry, united. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about community standards. It was about power. About one person using fear, bureaucracy, And yes, arson to punish a man for saying no. I held up a folder. The now infamous evidence. Videos, documents, confessions. And here's what your tax dollars uncovered. Fraud, corruption, a fire that could have killed someone. The mayor nodded. Thank you. We've reviewed the evidence. Our decision is unanimous. He glanced down at the gavel and then spoke the words everyone was waiting for. Effective immediately, the Oakspire HOA is officially dissolved, all accounts frozen, all annexation claims voided, and all pending legal actions are to proceed at the county and federal levels. He struck the gavel. Bang! It was done. A murmur rose through the crowd, followed by scattered applause. For the first time, the residents of Oakspire weren't just observers, they were free. Delilah didn't even stay to hear the end. She rose slowly, walked past me without a word, and exited the building with her lawyer close behind. That was the last time I ever saw her. 2 weeks later, her house went up for auction to pay restitution. The same pristine lawn she once guarded like a military base now grew weeds. I used my settlement funds and donations from a community I once didn't trust to rebuild my home from the ground up. This time, with more fireproofing, with solar panels, with a porch swing facing the mountains. But the real rebuild was in the people. Without the HOA's grip, neighbors began to talk again. They planted wildflowers where there used to be clipped hedges. They painted their doors bright, joyful colors. The couple down the road started a community garden. Kids ran freely without being scolded for riding bikes past 6 p.m. Lisa stopped by one morning, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Feels different, doesn't it? She said, sipping. It feels like it was supposed to, I replied. Before she left, she smiled. So, what are you going to do now, Judge? I looked out at the land I'd fought for, the home I'd rebuilt, the peace I'd reclaimed. Live, I said. And finally, breathe.